All right.
Great.
We are going to record it just for those few people who may not be able to make it, or anybody else who wants to watch it on YouTube.
Yeah, so if you don't want to be on YouTube, you can turn your cameras off. That's totally fine. Not that they are going to have millions of views probably on this. I'll go ahead and start sharing my screen, Kelly.
Okay, yeah, go for it. Well,
okay. Do you want me to start or wait?
Yeah, go ahead and try. Yes.
Okay. Great. Awesome. Okay. So you should all be seeing my slides up on your screen. So please let us know if you're not. For some reason, I'm seeing some nodding heads, so that's always good. Kelly, do you want me to go ahead and start, or do you want me to wait a moment?
Let's wait like another minute and
okay.
See if anybody else comes in. And also, if anybody has any questions during the presentation, if you want to just throw it in the chat after the presentation, I will let Stephanie know.
Sure, and also feel free, if it's something you have a question about while I'm presenting, you can feel free to just ask me the questions, Kelly. That's great. Because I like it to be interactive. I find it more interesting than somebody just talking at you for an hour, 45 minutes. So yeah, if I say anything that you're curious about or you want more information, just feel free to pop it into the chat and Kelly will let me know. We find it a little bit easier if one person's moderating the questions, but yeah, so that's great. We'll be getting started in just a minute or so.
Yeah. I'm not seeing anything on my page. Let's see.
You're not seeing slides on your screen?
No, it says it just says my video is stopped, my microphone is unmuted, and I'm in safe driving mode. I'm using this on my phone.
Oh, that's probably why. Yeah, you have to turn off safe driving mode on your phone or you won't see the slides. You can hear the presentation, but you won't see the slides.
Okay, well, that's fine.
Okay.
That's not good.
And then
as long as you're not driving.
Yeah, not driving.
Okay, good. Because I cannot condone that kind of behavior.
Oh, this is not working.
And Kelly, you might want to mute everyone once we get rolling, just in case there's noise from your houses. It can be a little distracting.
All right, Stephanie, if you want to, looks like we got most everybody in.
Great.
An eye on the stragglers. But if you want to start, go ahead.
Sounds great. Hi, everyone. I'm Stephanie Weaver. I'm a cookbook author, writer, chronic illness advocate. I'm currently now based in Oceanside, California. Up until May, for about 25 years, I lived in San Diego in North Park. So I'm definitely a San Diegan, and also Coronado is one of our favorite places, and it's where we got engaged. So I have many happy connections with Coronado. And I'm excited to talk to you today about my favorite spice, smoked paprika. So when I found out about this program, I was really excited to put this presentation together for you and share those recipes from my two books. So the books are the Migraine Relief Plan and the Migraine Relief Plan Cookbook, which just came out. And they are anti-inflammatory recipes. They're family friendly. So they've been tested by families all over the country and actually in other countries. And so even if you don't have migraine headaches, they're still fantastic recipes to try and to use, because most of us are dealing with some kind of inflammation. So it's always good to have new tasty recipes in your arsenal there. So why is that not working? Oh, okay, I guess I'm just clicking. Got it. So I'm also going to share a little bit about the process of making a cookbook, because I know people usually have a lot of questions and interest in that. So it was actually 12 years ago that I started putting out the call for a food blog I was planning on starting called, at the time it was called Recipe Renovator. And I was going to take recipes and change them up to make them healthier for people with food allergies, diabetes, etc. And then it turned out a few years after that blog got started that I was diagnosed at age 53 with migraine headaches. And I started learning about what foods were helpful and not so helpful for migraines, and ended up writing these 2 books. But it's just kind of fun to see this popped up in my memories a couple last month, and I was like, oh my gosh, that's when this whole thing started. So first I want to talk a little bit about what paprika is, and then we'll get into smoked paprika. So this is a photo of the Hungarian peppers that paprika is named for and comes from. And they are these peppers, which are dried and then ground into a fine powder. They are Hungarian paprika, and sweet paprika is not at all spicy. In my mind, it doesn't have a ton of flavor, but it's primarily used for its very bright red color. And the best of it is purchased in Hungary. I was actually able to go to Budapest in 2019, and we did bring some home. It's also produced in Spain and California and South America. So you can see that it's become a very popular spice around the world, and these peppers are grown for this reason, which is exciting. And so if anybody can't see the screen, they're just kind of long, skinny peppers that are very bright red. And the photo, they're sort of on the pepper plant, so they're surrounded by green foliage. Now, smoked paprika is it's not completely different, but in terms of flavor, it's totally different animal than regular paprika. And so this photograph shows you the smoked pepper that these come from, as well as the ground spice, which is a really rich kind of reddish brown color from the smoking. It's originated in Spain, and it is from a specific type of pepper when it's produced in Spain, and it's smoked over an oak fire. So when you have those components happening, then you have the Spanish smoked paprika. It comes in 3 sort of flavor profiles: the dulce, which is the kind of sweet spice; agridulce, which is bittersweet and medium hot; and then picante, which is hot. It's difficult to find the agridulce and the picante here in the United States. You probably could find it from a spice purveyor that has more exotic spices, more unusual spices. Sorry. But that's where it comes from. That's how it's made. And if you're looking to purchase it, if you're looking for it in bulk, like if you use a lot like I do, Penze Spices is a great provider, because they do sell it in all different amounts, which is great. If you're not sure about spices, and this is what I recommend really to keep your spices fresh, and I have some tips about that in that first book. The way to tell, you want to keep spices in a cool, dry place. So not right next to the stove. It doesn't have to be the refrigerator, but a dark cabinet is great. Dark jars are great. And the way to test whether a spice is fresh or not, or still good, is you open the jar and you sniff it. And if it smells musty, you want to replace it. And I'm a big fan of reusing and recycling. So I just refill my jars, wash them out, maybe make a fresh label. And then I love to go to a store like Whole Foods, which carries the Spicely organic spices line. These are small boxes. It's just, an ounce or so. And it's a perfect amount that fills up, like maybe half of a large jar, the sort of typical jar size that you get. And then you always have fresh spices. So instead of buying a whole jar of big something and then you don't end up using it, you use 1 teaspoon and then 5 years later, you're like, oh, I never used that marjoram or whatever it was. This is a way to keep your spices really fresh without spending a fortune, which I'm also a big fan of, is not spending a fortune. If you become obsessed with a spice, as I have, there is a splurge version of it, which is called Spice Tribe. And this is a company that does single origin importing, meaning they're getting spices from one specific region of one specific country, and they know exactly where that spice comes from. So this is Pimentón de la Vera, which is their brand. I'm probably not pronouncing this Spanish right, but Extremadura, Spain is where it's from. And when you open this jar, it's just like the angels sing, and you get this incredible smoky, sweet, lovely flavor smell that I just want to put it on and in everything. So that's my splurge. I usually ask for my husband to get me a couple jars for Christmas, and then I use them up through the year. It's not crazy expensive, but it's definitely more expensive than other places. So a couple of things that I also wanted to share are some books that if you're really into cooking, you're really into spices, which you probably all are if you're signed up for this program. The first one is The Spice Companion by Leorlev Circus, and it's a guide to spices. And so there's pages and pages of information on each spice, what it pairs well with, and then I think there's usually 1 or 2 recipes for each of the for each spice that they feature. And it's not a cookbook primarily, it's a reference book, and it's fantastic if you're really into cooking and you want to learn more about how to pair foods and things like that. So what Spice Companion says is that this is a spice that's used very often in Paprika, which is the Hungarian dish, stew made from light meat, so chicken or pork. And so you may have heard of chicken paprika. I never realized it was actually named for the paprika, but that's what it's named for. But those stews, if they're called paprika, do not have sour cream in them. So that's what distinguishes them from similar stews that also use the paprika, not the smoked paprika, but regular paprika. And then paella, which is a Spanish rice and seafood dish. It's also fantastic mixed with egg salad, mac and cheese. It pairs well with other spices like caraway, cumin, garlic, ginger, and thyme. So that's always helpful to know. Like if you're kind of whipping something up, it's good to know which spices really pair well with each other. And some other things they suggest is that if you have, I think what they described as inferior canned tomato or jarred tomato sauce, just meaning, not super expensive, maybe not the richest flavor. You can adjust the color and the intensity of that and the flavor of that tomato sauce by adding a little bit of smoked paprika. You can also mix it with yogurt to marinate chicken thighs. It's used in Spain for shrimp and garlic, patatas bravas, which are their delicious fried potatoes, beef stew, paella, as I mentioned, and it's the coloring in their chorizo sausage. It also pairs well with corn succotash, clam chowder, and lamb ribs, is what they say. So I always find it really fascinating when I get one of these companion books and reference books and learn more about the spices and how other people are using them and what they pair with. And the other book I wanted to mention that does this beautifully is called The Flavor Bible by Karen Page and Andrew Dornenberg. And what they did was they interviewed all these chefs all over the country and possibly the world, and asked them, for this food, what do you pair it with? What do you use it with? And so there's no recipes in this book. It is all about pairings. And so if you can look up any food and it will tell you what spices go best with that, what pairs well with it, what other foods pair well with it. And so when I'm developing recipes, like let's say I go to the farmer's market and I see a vegetable that I haven't ever had before, I'll go to my Flavor Bible and I'll look it up and I'll say, oh, okay, I've never, cooked that before, but according to this, these 3 spices might work really well with that. And so then I'll, make up a soup or whatever I'm working on. So this is a fantastic reference book. And so what they say is the strongest pairings are with chickpeas, chorizo. So we see that's coming around again, and seafood. Grilled meats and pork. Yes, I'll say yes to all of those things. Potatoes for sure, one of my favorite foods. And you can mix it with mayonnaise and serve it with seafood, and it's fantastic. So it's a really quick little side sauce. So if you're grilling shrimp or you're doing, skewers or things like that, it's a fantastic pairing and a super easy way to use some of your smoked paprika that you've purchased or you got from Kelly. Okay, so why did I pick this spice? Aside from it being one of my favorites. So I ate plant-based for a long time, and a lot of my readers asked for more plant-based recipes. So one of the things that's challenging when you're cooking plant-based is you're looking for that sort of rich, earthy, umami flavor that animal protein can add to a dish. And this is one of those foods that adds that really rich umami flavor. The smokiness also kind of adds like a barbecue kind of note, which again is very helpful if you're only cooking with plants. And it's also safe for most people who have migraines. So sometimes the smoking process can affect people. And some people are sensitive. I mean, there's people who are sensitive to everything, so I always tell people, you need to try things out yourself. But generally speaking, this should be fine for people who do get migraine headaches. And so it's one that I tried to choose kind of a limited palette of spices for my books, because I find it really annoying when I go to a recipe or a cookbook and it's 6 spices that I don't own that I have to go out and buy, and it uses a teaspoon or half a teaspoon of each one. And then I'm never going to use those again. I see some people nodding, so I know this is not just me. So that's been kind of a pet peeve. And also, this book was designed for people who are not feeling well a lot of the time. So I wanted the recipes to be relatively simple, to not be very expensive to make. And so I just picked a kind of a limited but delicious palette of spices to use. And so this is one that's a real go-to in both of the books. Both of my books are also low sodium, because anybody who has any issues with balance, dizziness, vertigo, which I'm all 3, need to watch our sodium. And so I wanted to make salt-free recipes that had a ton of flavor. So I'm looking for foods that are providing that kind of concentrated flavor. And this is one of those spices that does that. I also use it when I make hummus, homemade hummus. It adds delicious flavor. You can make roasted pepper hummus, but you can also just add this spice and you kind of get that same kind of flavor profile without having to add the roasted peppers. So, and are there any questions so far? Kelly, I just want to check in before I continue on. No? Okay. All right, so I wanted to kind of take you on a tour of one of the recipes that I sent you, explain how it got developed, why, etc., because I think it'll be hopefully interesting for you all. So this is my sheet pan chicken thighs recipe. And my readers between book 1 and book 2 they wanted really easy recipes. And sheet pan recipes are great for that, because you just throw a bunch of things on a sheet pan and you stick it in the oven, and then basically, you have dinner when you're finished. I love fried chicken, but I don't have a fryer in my house. And I find the few times that I have deep fried, it's super messy. You've got to deal with all this oil after the fact. If you don't have the temperature right, things can get greasy and soggy. And it's also tough to do gluten-free, which my books are because of the inflammation process. A lot of people find it helpful to limit gluten or reduce gluten in their diet. So, and many people just don't fry stuff at home. So I wanted something that could be done in the oven that kind of gave you that crispy fried chicken, flavor without having to do that. And this particular recipe happens to be grain-free, because a lot of people that follow my plan are also following other plans that limit grains. So that's why this particular one is grain-free. I added a real flavor punch from garlic powder. And if you like garlic powder and use it, Penzeys has a roasted garlic powder that's amazing. So strongly recommend you check that out if you're a fan of garlic. For this recipe, I used white pepper versus black pepper, which I like for lighter dishes. I think it pairs really well with foods that aren't as strong. So like if I was making a beef stew, I would use black pepper, but a chicken dish, I might use white pepper. Smoked salt, which I use in a very small amount, just for that additional smoky flavor. And then a little bit of chipotle powder, which is another type of smoked pepper that's hotter. So it's actually a jalapeno that's smoked. That's what chipotle is, and ground up into a powder. So very small amount, and you can adjust that. So if people are making it for kids or grandkids, they would omit the chipotle probably, but it still has that really nice kind of smoky flavor. All right, so how do I create these recipes and how do they come to be? So anytime I'm producing a recipe for either my blog or one of my books, I will make it at least 3 times. Often I'll make it more like 5 times until I feel like I've really got it down. Husband has signed off on it. Neighbors have signed off on it. I'm like, yes, this is good to go. Then I would send it out to my recipe testers. So this was 7 years ago. This is what just popped up on the screen is my little Facebook post asking people if they wanted to be recipe testers for my upcoming book. I also put out a call on, other forms of social media, and I ended up with about 45 people that tested recipes from 6 countries, which was really cool. And so I developed this recipe in the fall of 2019. Most of the recipes in the book were developed then. And this got sent out to the testers in early 2020. So what just popped up on the screen is the recipe testing form, not for this particular dish, but this is what it looked like. So anybody who signed up to be a tester knew that this was going to be what their requirement was, to fill out a form. They could type it or they could handwrite it and then send me a photo or scan it. And at least 3 people had to make it, and everybody had to love the recipe in order for it to go into the book. I also learned a lot from the recipe testing process. The photo on the screen right now is of someone who'd made these chicken thighs and sent me the picture so I could see how it came out when they made it, which is awesome. I look at all their comments. I revise the instructions based on what they tell me. Some of their information ends up going into the cook's note. And so a couple of those things were that one person said, you might want to have people mop up the oil before they flip them over because it was, like almost on fire in my oven. And I was like, that's a good suggestion. We don't want anybody's ovens to be on fire. And then they suggested, that do you line the pan with foil? Some people don't like to cook with foil, so there's always a note in there like this: you don't have to use foil if you don't want to. But it makes cleanup a lot easier, and you definitely have to use a rimmed pan for this because there is a lot of oil that comes off the chicken skin, which is why they get so delicious and crispy. But you also need to have that oil go somewhere, and you don't want it dripping onto the bottom of your oven. So that's part of what I learned from the testing process. I think that's a really critical piece. Not every cookbook writer does this. Not every blogger does this. So if you get a book from the library, you purchase a book and you find the recipes are kind of disappointing, it could be that they didn't have a really strong testing process in place, or they maybe just have a professional recipe tester that they use, which is great, except that person knows how to saute and they know what a saute pan is. And not everyone does. Not everyone is a skilled home cook. And so one example was I have this breakfast hash that's just vegetables that are diced up and you just saute them in a pan. Super easy recipe. I make it all the time. We have it, with breakfast, but we also just throw it in a grain bowl or have it as a dinner side. And I probably made it 50 times before I sent it out to these testers. And one of them came back and said, this was terrible. And I said, really? Tell me more. So it turned out she didn't have a saute pan in her house. She just had a stock pot. So she was trying to saute vegetables in the bottom of a stock pot, which is very narrow. And so they were steaming. And so they were very mushy. And so without testing, I would never have known that I had to make it clear that this requires a saute pan or cast iron pan of a certain width, because otherwise you're not going to get the good result. And that was actually something I ended up sort of having a little bit of a tussle with my editors, because they were like New York foodie people. And they're like, well, everyone knows what a saute pan is. I said, actually, everyone does not know what a saute pan is, and they don't necessarily understand why that's required. So I had to sometimes sort of fight to keep certain instructions in, because I knew from the testing process how important they were. Okay, so I just wanted to explain kind of, this is what the sheets look like, the recipes look like when they go out to the testers. And this is what it ends up looking like in the book. So I wanted to kind of explain, how do we go from, my typed up Microsoft Word to what you actually would see in the cookbook. So the first thing I'm just going to talk about is, the title. Sometimes I already had the title. Sometimes the recipe testers would talk about it in a particular way, and I would think, oh, that's kind of a better title. Sometimes the editor would dislike my title and we'd have a conversation about it, and sometimes they would win, and sometimes I would put my foot down. Just depended. So that's kind of how that went along. Then the next thing, which I can't see very well because of where my icons are, but it's the icons in the top right corner of each page. So because a lot of the folks that are on special diets, if they come to Migraine, they might already be on special diets, or they might already know they have food sensitivity. So I think it's really important to let people know what those, which of these recipes fit those diets. And there's, in the back of both books, there's an index that has all the names of the recipes and which special diets they fit. So if people are egg-free, dairy-free, grain-free, vegan, vegetarian, those are the categories. And so they created these really cute little icons for that, so that those show up on each recipe. And then the next thing, why is this happening? There we go. Is what's called the head note. That's the little 2 or 3 sentences below the title. And it's kind of where the cookbook writer is talking to you, the reader. They might be telling you a little story about the recipe, why they love it, where it came from, where they had something similar that inspired the recipe. This is also where a lot of the information that I got from my testing sheets ended up in the conversation. So, one of the people said, the skin was exquisitely crispy and the meat was incredibly juicy. And I was like, that's a great line. So it went into the head note to make sure that you use a rimmed pan, not a cookie sheet. And a couple people said, my kids are the pickiest eaters, and they ate 2 pieces of this chicken. So I couldn't believe how much these, kids that will only eat chicken nuggets were eating this recipe, which is a huge win for parents, because they prefer oftentimes to be able to make something that's homemade. It's maybe a little less processed for their kids, but if kids are picky, they won't eat it. So that's kind of how those get developed. You'll find some cookbooks where there's way more story. I find that I don't tend to like some books. If the voice of the author is really strong, I will kind of read them cover to cover. I don't know how many of you do that if you are into cookbooks. Sometimes people just don't pay any attention to these, and that's completely fine. But it's kind of a balancing act of putting just enough information to kind of whet the appetite of the reader without having it be this very long paragraph that they're just going to skip over, or that's going to take up too much space on the page, because that's another consideration. And then this is a part of the recipe where you find serving size, prep time, cooking time, and passive time, which is anything that needs to rest or cool or marinate. And so, and whether they're considered budget friendly, very or moderate was the 2 categories. And this is all based on, I'm a fast prepper. So I always add 10 minutes to what my prep time is, because I know that I cook and chop much faster than the average person. So I want it to be realistic. I want people to look at this and say, this is a 40-minute recipe. And then when they're done, they look at the clock and it's been 40 minutes. I think that's really important, because time is their, most precious asset. And they're not going to make a recipe if it takes an hour and a half. There's 2 recipes in my book that are a lot of prep and take a long time. And I address that. I say, look, this is not a recipe you're going to make real often, but it is worth it to put the time in because of the end result. But most of my recipes, I try to make, 30 minutes or sooner. And then the cook's note is not, you won't find this in every cookbook, but my publisher, they have they have editorial guidelines that all of their books, they're actually just a very, very good cookbook publisher. They're Surrey books out of Chicago area. And so this is where you can add other information. So like some people don't like to use the spray oil from the store. So yes, you can drizzle the oil over. You can line the pan with foil to make cleanup a breeze. It's also discusses the variance in chicken thigh weight and package size. And so you might have to adjust your cooking time. And this is also where one of my testers said, Penzeys roasted garlic powder is incredible in this recipe. And I said, oh, I've never tried that, but I'm going to put that in the cook's note because that's a really great note. And one thing about the migraine diet is regular onions are not included because they can be a trigger for a lot of people. So you can use shallots and garlic and green onions, which is, I use all of those. So that's why, having a couple of versions of garlic powder on hand can be helpful for folks because you're just adding another layer of flavor, especially when it's a low sodium recipe. And then I have serving suggestions, which was a request from a couple of my testers. Tell me what I can serve this with, because people don't necessarily know, they're not necessarily creative or really can think outside the box. So you have to tell them, pick 2 sides from my scrumptious sides chapter, add a big green salad. And that might seem kind of obvious, but people actually need that kind of direction, or they want that kind of direction. And then the last thing that you'll find in both of my books is the nutritional analysis. I don't include calorie count. There's a bunch of reasons for that. I can answer that at the end if you want. But so it's really just the protein, carbs, fat, because there's a lot of people that need to watch their carbohydrates if they're diabetic. People need to look at their sodium counts. And so and I tell them this was, this changes if you make it completely without salt. That's 106 milligrams of sodium versus 180. So next up is the beautiful photography, which is a super important part of cookbooks now. Didn't used to be. If you look at Joy of Cooking or even some other recent cookbooks like Salt, Fat, Acid, Heat don't have any photographs. But with the rise of food blogs and Instagram, it's really difficult to sell a cookbook that doesn't have photography. It can be done, but it's kind of an expectation on consumers. So I was lucky enough to work with Laura Bashar, whose blog is called Family Spice. She's an incredible recipe developer and photographer. She's the author of the Camp and Cabin Cookbook, 100 recipes to prepare wherever you go. She's an expert at cooking over flame in cast iron. So that's what this is basically like. If you go to camp or you go to cabins and you want gourmet food, Laura's your go-to for that. It's an incredible cookbook, tons of how-to photographs because she shows you like how to use the coals and how to use the cast iron Dutch oven. You can make cakes. It's really incredible what she's done with this book. So Laura is local. She's a friend of mine. So I was excited to know I could work with her again. And the plan was in 2019 that we would have a couple of days where I would go up to her house and I would help prep and cook and she would shoot and I would be kind of her assistant and we'd do a bunch of behind the scenes photography and we'd have a great time. And then the pandemic started and none of that happened. So we had to adjust. So this is a photograph of Laura's setup at her house. So you can see her couch in the background. She's got a big table. She's got a background that probably is kind of similar to the slide background, which is like a faux concrete. And then she's got a whiteboard on the left side that's bouncing light to kind of fill the photograph. And then her camera's on a tripod on top, shooting straight down. So this is what it actually looks like behind the scenes of every food photography shoot. So people have, sometimes real backgrounds, but sometimes fake backgrounds, vinyl backgrounds. They might have a board, that it looks like the wall, but is actually not really a wall. And that's so that they can control the lighting and make the food look really incredible. And so what we had to do was Laura would shoot and she would, this is actually her shooting the chicken. So there's a different picture that she posted on Instagram. This is her dog Simon in his little doggy bed in front of the table, watching over her. And in this case, she's shooting kind of at a 3/4 angle, and you can see she's got a kind of what looks like a wall, a white wall behind it that looks like a white tiled wall. Again, that's a vinyl background. And she's got the chicken, possibly the chicken, maybe something else, I'm not really sure. We're going to see the chicken in a minute. So what Laura and I had to do was we would meet halfway between her house and my house at a Starbucks parking lot. I would have prepped as many things as I could. I would hand them off with, at that point there was, way pre-vaccine. So we were, very long distance handing things off to each other, saying hello, waving at each other. And then she would go home and then she would start shooting and she would be texting me photos from her iPhone, asking me, was I happy with, how this was looking? So I'm just going to show you the progression of this chicken recipe photograph. So these are, as you can see, she was shooting from above. The chicken is sitting in a kind of a rustic container with a red and blue and white patterned, probably paper napkin kind of coming out the sides. This first shot just has some sliced scallions, sliced at an angle, kind of sprinkled on the top. And I said, it looks fine, Laura, but I think you can, keep working on it. So then she added the sort of ranch dressing in a little bowl and some carrot and celery sticks. And it still has the same scallions on top. And I said, yeah, that looks good, but there's kind of like a dark hole in the middle. Can you do something about that? So then she used her tweezers and she removed all of we used tweezers, all of the pieces of scallion, sent it back. I said, yeah, I feel like there's something missing still. Then she decided to stick some fresh thyme in there that kind of filled up the hole. And these are all her iPhone. And I'm just going to show you the final picture, which is the one from her fancy camera when it's been all processed and made to look beautiful. And that's the photo that goes in the cookbook. So I wanted to share that evolution with you so that you can appreciate a little bit more whenever you go through a cookbook, all the artistry that goes into all the food is edible. It might have like a lid underneath it, propping it up, or, things kind of angling it the right way, or we might have added some greenery just to brighten it up. But I knew that Laura, and I did, when I chose which 35 recipes were going to be photographed, I did choose them with my knowledge of food photography, knowing which ones were going to look the best photographed. Because there are some dishes that are delicious and they're just kind of brown or tan, and it's very hard to make them look appetizing. So you do want, when you're picking your photographs, you do want to pick the ones that are really going to be, very edible and delicious looking, because you want them to really jump off the page. So the last little section is going to be how we went from a manuscript to a cookbook. So that I signed the contract in the fall of 2019. We started recipe testing the beginning of 2020. The pandemic started. So my recipe testers had a little bit of a break because if you all remember, you couldn't go to the grocery store. You couldn't get food. There were shortages. Thankfully, we had done the bulk of the recipes before that started. And then by the time I was starting to get worried, and I messaged everyone, I said, do you want to do desserts? And they're like, yes, we want to do desserts. So thankfully we only had desserts and condiments left. So we were able to finish up the last 2 chapters. And then I had, basically another year to have the photos shot, put the manuscript together as a book. There's other elements to that. And it was due May 1st, 2021. So, sorry, must have gone backwards. So I turned it in May 1st. They started editing it in July, and it was edited July, August, and September of 2021. This is just a photo of my computer with the myriad of corrections that were sent back to me. I think there were like 4,000 edits in the document, which was a little daunting, but a lot of it is formatting. Like everything has to be exactly like there is a dash, there isn't a dash in the 1.5. You know, you have to write out teaspoons and tablespoons, et cetera, et cetera. Then it went into design and layout, October and November of last year. So basically almost just about a year ago, it was going into layout. I'm going to show you the cover options that they sent me. So I always, other people always find this interesting. So you get a bunch of different cover options. And so the first 3 I'm showing you are the roasted chicken with vegetable gravy and the quick turkey tacos, I believe is the other one. You can see that they use different type styles, different colors. You know, my name is bigger, more prominent or smaller, you know, the different orders of things. And then the next 3 are with a carrot soup, which is what we ended up with. And there was a long conversation about should there be soup on the cover? Should there be chicken on the cover? If there's chicken on the cover, will the vegans be upset? There's a lot of things to consider. And you also need to consider that there are fewer and fewer actual bookstores that people are going to be picking this book up and looking at it, and more likely they're going to be seeing it online, in which case it's a very tiny little thumbnail photograph. And so you really want the image to just really pop out. And so what we ended up with was a version of the one that's in the center here, because I wanted it to look like the previous book, because it is the follow-up to the previous book. So here you can see the migraine relief plan on the left and the migraine relief cookbook. So while it's not exactly the same, it's the same typeface, it's the same font treatment, and it's a complementary color scheme, which is important to me because I wanted them, if they sat next to each other, I wanted them to look like a pair. So that isn't something that I thought I was going to have to remind the publisher of, honestly, but I was very happy that they were, you know, and some publishers, you don't get this much input. That's part of the reason why I really love this publisher. They're super collaborative, and that was great. And then you get a design sample of interior pages. So I'm just showing you the introduction spread, and the designer actually created some artwork that she found on the internet, kind of the idea of it, and then she created some artwork to kind of make these pages a little bit more interesting. So then you approve those, then they lay out the whole book, October, November of last year. You start proofreading it, that goes through a couple of rounds. There's a proofreading editor that goes into it as well. So the very last of that was January 2022. So now we're in this year. You have to then ask for other authors to recommend your book. They're called blurbs. So you have to send out the PDF of the book and give them 3 weeks to take a look at it and say yes or no. And then they're going to send you a little paragraph, and you have to, get those back. And then the team decides what goes on the back cover. And then the files were due to the printer in late January. And this was for a June or July release. With the pandemic and the shortages, everything in publishing has been really up in the air. So I was very happy when the first copies arrived in the US in late May, and then we knew that all the copies were actually physically here. It got here safely from China because there was a bunch of containers that went into the Atlantic Ocean last year that had 2 best-selling New York Times best-selling authors' cookbooks in them, which was not something like on my worry list, was like my books might end up at the bottom of the ocean. So I was really happy when they said they are in the warehouse in the United States, like, yes. And then they sent me my copy, my first copy. So this is a picture of me holding the book, which I posted on social media. I was very excited. Looks absolutely beautiful. Actually, this, I think, is the picture the dog was overseeing, because it was that red dish and she had the hibiscus flowers. So I'm pretty sure that's what she was shooting that day. And then this is me and Laura, the photographer, when we could actually see each other in person and not be 7 feet away from each other. So I was able to give her copy in person in June or July of this year. And here we are. So the publication day was July 12th. And I'm very happy to take any questions. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, but if you want to follow me, I'm on Twitter and Instagram at sweaver, WEAVER, MPH, like miles per hour, but it stands for Masters of Public Health. So Stephanie Weaver was already taken by the time I figured out I needed to be on all these social media platforms. So figure it's sweaver, MPH makes sense. It's pretty short. And everybody can follow me. You can ask me questions there. If you're interested in, if you have migraines and you're interested, I actually have a support group for readers on Facebook. If you just search Migraine Relief Plan, you'll find me there. And now I can answer any questions that you have. So you can unmute them if they're muted. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Stephanie.
Yeah, absolutely.
That was awesome. Does anybody have any questions for Stephanie?
Or did you try any of the recipes? Yeah. Karen.
A question. I was curious when you said that onions are a trigger, but shallots and garlics are not. I kind of thought they were all kind of the alum family, but maybe I'm wrong.
No, they're all alliums. So
Okay.
the challenging thing about the migraine diet, so not everybody has food sensitivities or triggers. And that's part of the reason I wrote the plan, was to help people figure out what their unique pattern is, because everyone's different. The food list is bewildering. You know, it's like, why are green onions okay and regular onions are not okay? And nobody really knows, because no one has examined all those fruits and vegetables, or primarily fruits and vegetables are the issue, to understand what those active compounds are. So my guess is that whatever compound is in onions that people are sensitive to, the fact that the onion is mature, it's grown underground for that long period of time, there's more of it in there. So you'll find, some people are sensitive to MSG, which is made from plants, but it's kind of a concentrated powder. I'm sensitive to fermented foods. So that's an amino acid called tyramine, which is a breakdown product of the amino acid tyrosine, which is naturally found in foods, but it's very highly concentrated in all those really good for you fermented foods like sauerkraut and fish sauce and kombucha and all the things that I used to have in my fridge was full of that I can't eat anymore, because I now know I've never been able to drink alcohol without getting a headache. So that wasn't a super big surprise to me, but I had no idea that fermented foods were an issue. So yeah, it's challenging, because you can eat any berry except raspberries. Why? Like, I don't know, but I didn't make up the list. The list came from a doctor who's been working with patients for 30 years and developed the list. There's a bunch of different lists that are around. I felt like his had the best background behind it. And then I made my plan very low in sugar and low gluten, because they can be inflammatory. They're not triggers, but inflammation can trigger migraine. And then the idea is not that you have to eliminate onions forever, but you do sort of this test period if you want to figure out what your triggers are. You do that for a few months, and you kind of eat on the baseline of the plan, and then you test foods individually, and then you find out that, oh, it's not actually onions at all that's a problem for me. It's the sodium, or it's just grapefruit, but not any other citrus, and avocados are fine, or, oh my gosh, avocados were a super problem for me and I didn't know it. So that's the idea with the first book. And the second book is basically just 115 more recipes that reflected a lot of the requests my readers had for, like, bulk cooking, more snacks. They wanted, things they could make on the weekends and freeze. They wanted foods recipes that used up leftovers. So there's a chapter called Progressive Recipes, where there's 3 base recipes, and then there's 3 to 4 recipes you can make from the leftovers. So that's kind of, but yeah, it's the food list is daunting, which is why I ended up writing both books, because it's hard to eat on the plan. And that's why you need so many recipes. But the goal is not to be on the restricted version forever. It's just to figure out what you personally need to avoid.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Other questions? Did you guys make any of the recipes? What did you make? So you need to unmute yourselves.
Okay. I made, coincidentally, I picked up my packet a little bit late. And so I didn't have the recipes, but I coincidentally was planning on having salmon one night and chicken another night. And I did have spice on hand. My grandparents were Hungarian. So I grew up with eating a lot of dishes with paprika, chicken paprikash, and on the potatoes and you name it. But these recipes were, I thought, well, this is perfect. I'll try the grilled salmon and then the chicken thighs, and they were both amazing. And I really enjoy the way you have the recipe set out. I love having the little extra notes. A lot of times I'll look at recipes online and you have to go to the comments to get those things, because other people who had made it say, oh, I suggest doing this or this. And I love how you incorporated that into the recipe itself and give some alternatives. Very easy to follow, and some great results. The salmon was amazing as far as the crispiness and stuff, definitely going into my rotation.
Yay.
And the same way with the chicken thighs. So very, very good.
Awesome. Glad to hear that. That makes me really happy.
Yep.
You folks, Chris and Linda, did you have something you wanted to say?
So we made the chili mac skillet dinner.
Did you like it?
And we added kidney beans,
Oh, great.
because we had this great debate over, he likes black beans and I like kidney beans. But I'm a traditionalist. Like if the person who wrote the cookbook says use this, that's what you use until you decide that that's not what you want to use.
Yeah,
And
that's awesome.
the kidney beans were absolutely the way to go. Absolutely.
That's great. I'm
And
glad
we
to
made
hear
a
it.
low salt version of it. So
Fantastic.
the only thing I would add is, because we did low salt, I would probably next time add a little bit more tomato paste.
There you go. And that's what's great. The recipes are intended, hopefully they come out great with no changes, but then you can absolutely make them your own. That's kind of what I've done my whole life. A funny story about that, and there's another one that's similar. They're based on Hamburger Helper. There's two recipes that are based on Hamburger Helper. And so I mentioned that in the head notes that, I took the boxed helper and kind of deconstructed what was in the spice packet and then tried to figure out, could I make this and could it be the same amount of time? And the New York foodie editors were like, I don't know if people are going to understand this nostalgic reference. So I was like, they still sell Hamburger Helper. I just don't think you're in the center aisles of the grocery store, guys. So that made me laugh, because it's like, I wanted these foods to be very familiar to people who maybe don't cook very much, or they're cooking using convenience foods, but you can make a healthy version of it that doesn't have the junky additives that aren't really good for anybody, that make it taste good, but they're definitely, and low sodium. Any of those convenience products are very high in sodium, and I have to really watch my sodium. So I wanted to make sure that they work. So that's great. I'm glad you made the chili mac. It's a yummy dish.
Linda is moving us towards a much lighter salt
Yeah.
recipes.
So I had low sodium kidney beans on hand, but I will tell you, the minute he saw chili mac, because that's not a staple in our house. It's not a box in the cupboard, because it's high on salt. I mean, I haven't had Hamburger Helper since I was a kid. He immediately said, "Oh, I like chili mac." Because otherwise, we would have been gravitated to the chicken or the salmon.
Sure. That's great.
So I like this form because it causes us to kind of step out of our comfort zone. So I wanted to ask you, I noticed that you use products like coconut flour and coconut sugar. Is this because it's low inflammatory, or is this for flavor?
So so coconut oil is actually an anti-inflammatory, antifungal. It has a lot of really great properties. As long as you don't have heart disease, you should watch the intake of that if you have heart disease. And then the coconut flour is for grain-free diets is kind of one of the staples that people use. So because I have a lot of people that are following the anti-inflammatory, it's called the AIP, the anti-inflammatory protocol. So you might have heard of either keto or paleo. That came from a lot of people with autoimmune diseases that weren't getting help with regular doctors. And so they started turning to, well, what can I do with diet? So there's a feeling in that community that grains can be problematic. Now, that's not true for everyone. It's not true across the board, but I did want to provide some grain-free dishes, and that particular chicken thigh recipe just ended up being a grain-free one.
Can
So,
we substitute?
Yeah, regular flour or gluten-free flour, sure, absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Anybody else?
Yeah, I'll go next. Can you hear me?
Yes, hi, Susan.
Hi, I want to thank you very much for your presentation, and I never knew writing a cookbook was that much effort, so.
It's a
And
lot. Yeah.
I want to thank you in spades for introducing me to smoked paprika. Wow, I love it. I love it. And my husband's mother was born in Budapest, so I'm a little familiar with that. And I've been to Budapest, and we've been to Budapest. And in Budapest, you go to the grocery store, and there's no less than 26 different varieties of paprika in the store.
Yep.
It is amazing. It's so different from the US. So I went with a list of a couple ones that I thought would, round out my spices and bought it that way. But it's just amazing how many different varieties are there.
That's great. Thank you so much for sharing. Appreciate it.
And I also did the chili mac. I started there and never really got beyond it because we kept repeating it, making different variations of it. And I haven't had hamburger hot helper in 40 years either, but
Yeah.
it was a recipe. I'd never used that much spice in one recipe before, but it worked out. I mean, the spices are the basis of the sauce.
Yes, absolutely. That makes me so happy because that was like a re-engineering project. I went out and bought it because I hadn't had it either, and then looked at the packet, tasted the spice packet, tried to figure out what ratio of these different things are there in here to each other. I added a little bit of the coconut sugar to that one because the box has sugar in it. That's partly why it tastes so good, which you can skip or not. But yeah, and I wanted it to be something where you could mix the spices while the other things are cooking, and it still ends up the same amount of time as the box. And I was very happy that it came out. It's just such a good comfort food, and we make it with ground turkey or ground chicken, so it's pretty light and it's so tasty, and you can add a bunch of vegetables to it. So do we need to wrap up in the next 3 minutes, Kelly? Because I know
we're not crunched for time, so
Okay.
if you people still have questions, we can keep going.
Okay, why don't you turn off the recording just so that the file isn't crazy long for your YouTube channel? And then I'll take any other questions that people have.